Senator from Utah.
I rise today to speak once again about the process we've been following here in the Senate when it comes to major pieces of legislation. The Senate has been called the world's greatest deliberative body. However, if you look at how it operates these days, I don't think anyone would say that anymore, unless they're being sarcastic. We no longer have real debates. Most bills don't go through a committee where they can be refined and improved. And when the Senate Democratic leadership decides to bring a bill to the floor, we are far more often than not blocked from offering any amendments. The unemployment insurance legislation before us today is a good example. Republicans have filed dozens of amendments to this bill. Some of them would definitely improve the UI legislation. Others would address the underlying problems that have led some to call for another extension of federal unemployment benefits, namely the stagnant growth in our economy and jobs. Yet it appears that none of these amendments will get a vote because the Senate Democratic leadership has decided that it's more important to protect their members from having to take difficult votes than it is to actually legislate. I have filed several amendments, Madam President. Two of them in particular would help create jobs and prevent further job losses. One of those amendments would repeal the Obamacare tax on medical devices. We had 79 votes for that, and yet we can't get a vehicle that will put it through. The House will overwhelmingly vote for it, and yet we can't even get time on the floor to take care of it. That shouldn't even be considered controversial. Indeed, a large majority of senators have already voted in favor of repealing this job-killing tax and protecting an important American industry, or should I say important American industries, because there are a lot of industries in this area. Repeal of the medical device tax has bipartisan support in both the House and the Senate, as I've mentioned. I have another amendment that would repeal the Obamacare employer mandate. Now, in the face of this may seem more controversial, but it shouldn't be. After all, the Obama administration has already delayed the mandate for 2 years. If the mandate is so harmful that the administration is afraid to let it go into effect, why don't we simply do away with it altogether and ensure that it doesn't kill any more jobs? These are reasonable amendments, Madam President. They deserve a vote. Therefore, I ask unanimous consent that it be in order for me to offer my amendment number 2905.
Is there objection?
Madam President, reserving my right to reject the underlying emergency.
Senator from Rhode Island.
The underlying emergency bipartisan legislation is critical to helping 2.6 million Americans, and I would hope we could expeditiously move to that legislation. Therefore, I would object to the unanimous consent request by the distinguished senator from Utah with respect to his amendment number 2905.
Objection is heard.
Well, you can imagine how disappointed I am in that. I ask unanimous consent that it be in order for me to offer my amendment number 2906.
Is there objection?
Madam President,
the senator from Rhode Island.
The same logic, given the emerging nature and the bipartisan nature of the legislation before us, I would urge immediate action, and therefore I would object to the distinguished senator's request for unanimous consent.
Objection is heard.
Well, Madam President, the Senate didn't used to operate this way. I've been to the floor many times over the past few years to talk about the deterioration of the Senate procedures under the current majority and to call for a return to the deliberative traditions of this chamber. Many of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have done the same. Sadly, it appears that our calls have fallen on deaf ears. Madam President, I've been here a long time, and I have never seen it worse than it is right now. There have been some really rough times here over the years, but I've never seen it worse. Over the last number of years, the majority will call up a bill, And then they'll immediately file cloture like we're filibustering when we don't have any intentions to filibuster. All we want to do is be able to call up amendments. And then they'll accuse us of filibustering when there's no intention to filibuster, just have some amendments. And then, of course, call it a filibuster. Well, it's not a filibuster unless you have a vote on cloture. But nevertheless, that's been the technique around here that's been used for a long, long time in the last couple years. And frankly, it's not the way to run the United States Senate. Then what they do is they call up a bill. They then file cloture. They fill up the tree so you cannot have any amendments. Now, let me put it this way, and you really can't legislate, and the minority has no rights whatsoever. A lot of the Democrats on the other side of the aisle have never been in the minority. But that may happen. And then they're going to realize how important these rules are. And all I can say is that the Senate is not being run the way it should be run. Now, I have no objection to filling up the tree after a full and extended debate, when people have an opportunity to bring up their amendments. Full-blooded senators here on the floor have a right to bring up those amendments. They ought to be able to bring up those amendments. I have no problem with amendments that I totally disagree with being brought up. But you can't even do that most of the time in these bills unless, basically, the leadership on the Democratic side approves the amendments. Even though this body has always had the position that we can call up germane and non-germane amendments. And that's what makes this body great. It's what's given it such prestige over the years. Now, if it's run this way, it just means it's a rubber stamp for the leadership. And that can work both ways. I think it's a bad, bad thing to do. However, the principle's been started and the precedent has been laid. I just lament this because I've been here long enough to see some of the greatest debates in the history of the Senate done right here on this floor. Some were initiated by Democrats who wanted their rights to be able to bring everything up and to really have them debated, whether they were germane or non-germane, and assert their rights on the floor. Others were brought up by Republicans that Democrats didn't like. But the Democrat leadership in the past acknowledged that, my gosh, you have a right to do that in the most deliberative body in the world. But we've made it anything but the most deliberative body in the world with this type of procedure. Now, it is my hope that the Republicans will be able to take over the Senate in 2014. Perhaps that won't happen, but I would like to see it happen. And if it does, I think my friends on the other side are going to feel very badly if this same type of maneuvering is done to prevent them from bringing up the amendments they would like to bring up. And I don't doubt that it would be done for a while, just to make the point clear. But I personally believe that we would get back to the regular order that the rules were before this type of shenanigan, or shenanigans, I guess I should say, have taken place. This is important stuff. And there's a lot of feeling on our side as to how the Senate is currently being run. And as the most senior Republican in this body, I understand those feelings. I have them too. It's wrong. It's certainly not right. And we need to change this. And we need to make it back to the most deliberative body in the world. And should we do that, I think everybody here will breathe a sigh of relief and say, my gosh, both sides, each side will have these rights restored that have been so I think, distorted during the last number of years. Madam President, I'm sorry I couldn't get these two amendments. One of them was the medical device tax repeal. We brought it up before, but it was on a bill that did not go to the House, was not allowed to go to the House. 79 of our colleagues, 79 of us voted for that amendment. Bipartisan vote. A vote that had tremendous leadership on the Democrat side through the distinguished senator from Wisconsin, Minnesota, Senator Klobuchar, who has been a wonderful leader on that. If it wasn't bipartisan, maybe I'd understand it, but it's not only bipartisan, it's crucial to all of the medical device companies throughout the United States that have set precedents for the whole world. We're going to get that passed sooner or later. But in the meantime, we're having medical device companies leaving the United States because of that stupid gross tax on gross sales, if you can believe it. And there's only one reason it was put into legislation, and that was because they needed about $30 billion with a B for Obamacare. It was basically a phony approach to just come up with $30 billion that has deliberately hurt one of the greatest budding industries in America, many of which are moving overseas because of this stupidity. And I think we've got to change it. If you need to find other monies for Obamacare, and you would probably need to, in fact, it's not the only thing that's happening, then let's find them. But let's not continue to delay what's happening here. And on the medical device tax, you know, I can't think of a more stupid tax than a tax that taxes the gross sales of these companies. That is a dangerous, debilitating, disgusting, wrongful tax. And yet we can't even get a vehicle over here to put it on. The other body would pass it quickly so that we can get rid of it. All I can say is I'm very disappointed, but I do understand how this body works, and with that, I'll yield the floor and suggest the absence of a quorum.